Do you remember the first song that you started working on or fleshing out?
With the second record?
With the second
record,
yeah.
Well, we work in a collage sort of way, so any song can be any song at any point.
Because I read that you had about 300 ideas here.
Yeah, you do. You just have you have a library of moments that you've tried to capture. You know, I think the most important thing is having the freedom to create without editing first, and then later on you can look back at those ideas, and sometimes they'll be relevant now, or you know, there were some ideas that we would have written 2 or 3 years ago that may be relevant in 7 years. And that's when you kind of go back and go, oh, actually now that feels like a moment that can happen on the record, and we should now like develop that and flesh it out. So
it's good to like bank those ideas. You know, like Kanye, there's that story obviously of him making 3 beats a day every day for this summer. So you know, we try and write like every day, just whatever it is, maybe production, if you're not feeling like singing, and just constantly getting different bits and kind of banking them. If they sometimes ideas just happen and the song will come, bang, a whole thing, and you're like, whoa, cool, you know. And the song, you know, more and more, it ain't easy on the record. It's one later on that just happened very quickly, and others you're constantly collaging. You know, House in LA was something like 6 months total production, pretty much every day on it, which is kind of crazy. You know, it was.
But that's very interesting because, well, you mentioned all those sketches and having all these. I suppose they're attached to certain memories then and certain moods. So when you revisit them to make something out of it, do you go back to that initial kind of?
Totally. There's always like you know the ideas you've got which have got a spark. Like there's a chorus of Happy Man, the music, which was been sitting around for the first album. It was like a crazy beat we had, and just kind of we needed a chorus, and so we were like, we've got to change the music, so we just dragged that in almost, but that whole section was there for ages.
And then took the chorus melody from another idea completely that was like pretty left field and abstract.
Yeah, and it's that normally works over that, and if you pitch that and you've sung something there, and you can. You know, especially with technology these days, Ableton and Logic and programs like that, you can take an idea that was written at 110 in E flat and make it work at 120 in G minor, and then even then you get to the point where you're cutting the vocal up and re-stretching it. It's almost like a modern way of doing what
like sort of like that sort of wall
Strawberry
of sound.
Fields Forever as well.
Yeah, and also like Pet Sounds. Those sorts of multi-track layering and
with George Martin, you know, slowing the tape down.
They had to do it with tape.
That's the crazy thing is obviously like how in the past, you know, George Martin for example, like actually doing it with tape and cutting up tape, and you know, I'm a bit too clumsy and messy for that. I'd probably cut through the main section. And
but you've got like Dark Side of the Moon, where in order to get a long enough tape echo, they've made a tape loop like around mic stands at the whole studio, just so they can get the fucking echo long enough for what they need on record.
But so how much of this experimenting did you do before there was somewhat of a
it all happens
structure?
at the same time, really.
The experimenting is the great ideas that get captured come out of just somebody standing at a different place in the room. You know, I remember Cherry. Tom doesn't play much guitar, but it was the one song he played a little bit of guitar on, and it was like I was on the keys and you on the guitar, and then we kind of just play chords and play just jam. It's very important to like we'll just pick up 2 instruments, put a drum machine on and play for 20 minutes, and then sometimes you just get one moment that's like, well, that's it, that's the song. This happened with Busy Earning as well. There was like we had like a rubbish song for ages, and then we were like, okay, we're gonna make like a B-side for this song, and then this song just developed into what we now know as Busy, and just started getting more experiment, like more crazy, and it's like the cowbells coming in, like, oh, this is where we can let loose on the 12-inch edit, the disco edit, and you're like, hang on, wait, scrap that, let's bring that back and start at that point, and it's quite a good creative technique to just
start where you finish.
We'll just play and play, and then listen back, you know, rather than being like, here's my 4-bar verse. Okay, now make something good for this 4-bit, and it's like you then go, I'll delete. No, like never rip a page out. It's almost like You have to have a scrolling page, scrolling, close your eyes.
You can't edit while you create.
Play,
I think that's
play.
the most important thing
Not
that
to
we've learned.
Yeah, not to filter yourself.
Yeah, and then try to go quite crazy with it. Like, a lot of what you record needs to be outrageous, not kind of tame. And like, it's very easy. Every time I start in a place of like, you either start completely crazy, which is great, but you end up starting like quite like, But at the end of it, you're just going for it, and that's normally the bit where you need to start, because that's the attention grabbing bit.
Right. But with that in mind, then, because I'm not sure, but on the first track, I suppose the live thing wasn't a big part before you wrote the first couple of songs. So this time, when you know you have that live component, does that become a factor then? Do you think, well, we do have to translate this to?
Yeah, something? But I think for us was constantly about fighting back against that. It's important to, otherwise you end up. So we did try a load of early. We recorded, probably use at some stage, but we recorded a load of live drums, which was completely different for us because we'd never really done that before, and it wasn't quite right. It didn't quite work out how we wanted it to, but it felt too live. It felt too like, oh, this sounds like a live band, and I think we very much wanted. And at that point, we sort of knew what it was. It was like, this is drums. I like to listen to things where I'm not sure what's making them. How did they make that?
Right.
But you need to go through those processes and make those mistakes to then finally get to the outcome that you know is where you want it to sound and you want it to be like. If you don't go through that period of trial and error, effectively, or like experimentation, discovery. That's what it is for us. It's discovery. You've got to just get on that boat and set sail and not like have a map or a compass and just go like, where can this take us?
Can't really put too much, like, we're going to write an album, we're going to make an album, it's going to be 10 tracks, it's going to have these sort of sounds on it. You can't say it before you've done it, although like we like to do that for some reason. It's like human beings.
You can't make like a planner.
Right.
It's like you want to tell people, oh, okay, I'm going to paint a painting and it's going to be amazing and everyone's going to love it, but it's like, until you paint it and do it, it ends up being wildly different to what you thought it was going to be anyway,
Right. So can I assume then that the themes that are on the album, that they become apparent as you go along and afterwards as well?
Totally. I think that's really, one of the main things that shocks us, and we keep learning from the music. Essentially, it's like a healing record for us, a lot of the emotions we didn't understand while it was happening, and then even the storyline and the structure of each song within the whole album makes more sense. There's songs on there that potentially we didn't even want on there, but ended up on there because they made the story, and they make the story even stronger. I think it's it's important just to let it be and let it happen.
Well, before we get into the themes and the particular songs a little bit more, I'd like to ask, well, what is your relationship with LA? How do you see your relationship with LA?
So LA is just sort of like a place that I went to and, fell in love with somebody there. And like, if you've ever been in love, you'll follow that halfway around the world to make that happen. And so I suppose it chose me. There was no real like, okay, LA, like we're going to make it and go to LA. It just sort of happened that way, and kind of lived there for a bit. A lot of the experiences happened there, not necessarily the finishing or the writing of it. It's just because the songs are about that place. It wasn't necessarily all like we went to LA and recorded in LA. It's just where the experiences happened.
Yeah, that's definitely where you had those experiences that you needed to like have, those emotional experiences that you needed to have to write. And I had the same thing, but just in London and with a different girl. And we've both had, we've both grown up emotionally because of that, which is great. And I think that just gave us that little extra like push and that energy that you need, that emotional energy that you need to create honest music.
You can't complain about the sunshine.
Well, because I've never been to LA, so I find it fascinating, especially coming from where we are from. And there's one line I wrote down from Happy Man is "Buy yourself a dream," which almost sounds very American and very.
Yeah, I mean that comes halfway through the record, where I think for us it was like, cool, you can be successful and you can kind of want all these things and like work your whole life, but at the end of the day it doesn't equate to happiness. And it's basically it's like a song about material possessions and how they don't really mean anything.
But what I find interesting of this process, because both were breakups eventually, but then you mentioned emotional growth. So, but was it a tough album to make in that sense? Was it difficult to go through those emotions and kind of confront yourself with it?
Yeah, I think the hardest bit was, like, not making music isn't difficult. It's what we do to like hang out and have fun, and the hardest bit was actually learning how to, like, you know, write songs that successfully portrayed our feelings and our emotions and our story.
It's like you're just making songs that mean something to you, and like actually believing them and feeling them, you know, and getting into this sort of loop when you make something and you feel it and you're like, wow, I can and if you really feel it, it makes you stand up and cry and do all sorts of things, and that's what you're really looking for. You're looking for that moment when you jump out of your chair and you're like, you get a rush of like, wow, this is like intense. It's an intense euphoric experience. When it hits, it's very short, and you have to wait a long time just to have that feeling.
Right.
And sometimes that feeling can just be in the moment and might be kind of somewhat induced.
But I can imagine that those moments then reoccur when you're on stage performing live, but I'm not sure how much you've performed it yet.
Yes,
I've done it quite a bit. Anyway,
yeah.
some water.
Yes. Yeah, we played songs out quite a few times. You know, we wanted to take them to, you know, we played at this venue literally just here. This is Parodies on
North, yes.
Yeah, and we played to like 400 or 500 people. Wanted to be really intimate and try the songs out. I think, you know, in the internet generation that we live in, you know, people just put songs out and then they have to react to that in the real world, and we wanted to kind of make it real before we made it digital.
What have you noticed then, you talk about the honesty, so what have you noticed then about the response, and especially in those settings?
I think more online actually. Funny enough, the more kind of romantic side and the more ballad side of the record, you know, tracks like House in LA and Cherry, and they kind of have got a really good response emotionally. We've kind of been playing more of the singles and, you know, stuff like Happy Man Live, because those songs work more in that environment. You know, it's like that David Byrne book, you know, How Music Works, which goes on to describe how different settings and different places sort of...
Yeah, music matches its
environment. You know? So when you play live, you know, people are energised and they might have had a couple of drinks and kind of want to hear upbeat music and have fun. And
well, with that in mind, because this is just my interpretation, might be completely wrong, but is it fair to say that perhaps these songs are a little bit less danceable but more atmospheric and more, if you know what I mean?
I think they're just more three-dimensional potentially. I think there's another layer of depth which is going to potentially take listeners a little bit longer to like dig into. But, you know, we found that with, you know, one of my favourite second records by a band is Tame Impala's second record, because there's so much of them in the record, but you can feel that you need to dig in a little bit deeper in order to get to the core of what it either is about or what it can give to you emotionally. And that's kind of, I think, where we're at. Groove is obviously a massive part of everything we do, and there will, you know, when we're in the studio, we need to feel like we're moving. We need to, you know, that's an energy that we need when we're creating, because it just makes it more enjoyable. But yeah, maybe this is just a little bit, has a couple more layers that people need to dig through. But I think that's a good thing from our perspective. Finally, then,
you mentioned friendship, the kind of the friendship between you earlier on. How has the friendship between you changed over the last maybe 3-4 years?
I'd say we're probably closer emotionally than ever. When you're kids, you don't really like, you know, like 15-year-old boys like very rarely tend to talk about like emotions and things like that, and like life and what life means and what we do, and our emotional growth now has probably just connected us a little bit more on that level, you know, as adult men now, I guess.
In that sense, because this is a very honest album, and like you say, you go through those honest emotions. So this might be too grandiose a question, but have you found kind of an answer to that? The question of what is this band? What is this identity that we have?
I think we don't ever really want to know. I think it's really important not to try to create some sort of like mental image of yourself. I think, you know, it's kind of Buddhist, but I think when you start to do that, it starts to place a box around what we are or what we think we are. Essentially, we're just people and like creating stuff. And I think like if you try to keep it on that simple level, then you can make anything. And I think that that's like kind of true freedom within creativity.
Very last question. The album is called Forever, and you made, so is that why it's titled that?
Forever is it's a representation of like love. It's obviously a representation of like jungle and like
how we feel
the
about
music
it.
and like but ultimately within the context of the story and the emotion, it's, you know, it's about being with somebody and saying, you know, I love you forever, and whether that works or not, it can be a glorious thing, you know. It's like a circle, goes round and round.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
Cheers, dude. Thanks.